Okay, welcome. So we have discussed different geometry objects that we can create using the SF package in R. So we're going to start to move towards creating nice plots with spatial data, but we need to first have a map of our space, which we call a geometry. So we've discussed 7 of them so far: the point, the polygon, and then multi-polygons and multi-line strings and other combinations. There are 10 other geometry types that we haven't talked about. You can see them listed all out here. I'll just say that these are pretty rare to use, and most of the time you're going to be dealing with one of the 7 geometries that we talked about in the earlier video. I think that most of these have names that are pretty descriptive of what you're creating. This last one, TIN, this is like a system of complicated triangles. So when you're triangulating something. But there are some additional resources linked at the very end of this document that you can check out if you want to learn some additional information about these other geometry objects. But we'll mostly just focus on those first 7 common ones that we talked about. In addition to the geometry objects, I also want to point out before we move on is to talk about or just mention coordinate reference systems, so which we call CRS. And so a CRS must be provided if we want to place a point on Earth's surface. So if we're dealing with a data set that has like specific latitude and longitude or easting and northing, and we want to see like where on Earth would that point be, then we need to use a coordinate reference system. And if we don't, it's going to assume that we're talking, excuse me, that we're talking about objects in Euclidean space, XY or XYZ. So if you have locations on Earth, then you do want to specify a CRS, a coordinate reference system. But when we're importing a geometry object from a file, which is more often what we're doing, then those objects often have the CRS provided by default, and we don't need to worry about specifying it ourselves. But the most common CRS, if you're working with data, is usually going to be the WGS84. Other CRSs exist. It's getting a bit beyond the scope of what I want to focus on in this first module introducing us to the SF package. But just know that when you're combining geometry objects, we might need to specify a CRS, or we might need to convert one object from one CRS to another so that we can combine different objects. But these are important if you're doing more complicated analysis with spatial data, which this module is not really sufficient for getting really deep into the weeds of SF. This is more of an introduction to get you started. So there are some links that are provided over here if you want to learn more about CRSs, but I'm not going to dig deeper into that in this module beyond just mentioning them. But we'll be importing our objects in most of these examples from a shape file, something called a shape file, and that CRS will be automatically defined for us. Okay. So that's a wrap for this one. We'll move on in the next video talking about how we can create simple features objects. So the geometry object is one part of the simple feature. Remember, we also need to have some attribute data on top of that. Okay, thanks.